Senator Jerry Ortiz Pino has been a member of the New Mexico State Senate from 2005 until the present, representing District 12, Bernalillo County. His columns appear in the Albuquerque Free Press biweekly alternative newspaper. He chairs the Public Affairs Committee in the Senate and is active in legislative actions on numerous social and human services issues. He was a candidate for lieutenant governor in 2010. Trained as a social worker, Ortiz Pino has a rich history of work in family and children's services, both at the local and state levels, including, to name a few, Director of Family Services Division 2004 to 2008, Director of the Protective Services Division for the state, CYFD, 2003, Director for Albuquerque Department of Family and Community Services, 1997 to 2001. Well, I could go on, but I think you'd rather hear the senator.
Yesterday, I was reading through what we get every week, a weekly report to the legislators from the Legislative Finance Committee of activities during the previous week. And it's usually just this committee met and heard this information, and these contracts were let, and these bond issues were refinanced. It's a pretty dry reading. But right in the middle of this last week's report, there was something that just caught my eye, and it said that the New Mexico Department of Transportation had just awarded a $6.2 million contract for a wastewater treatment system to, I think it was Estancia, and it was awarded through the State Infrastructure Bank. I've been in the legislature 11 years. That was the first time I had ever heard mention of the State Infrastructure Bank. So I was at another committee meeting, but that meeting was kind of boring, so I did some rapid research on my laptop, and it turns out, like many states, New Mexico already has what's called a State Infrastructure Bank. It apparently is housed in the Department of Transportation in the state, and it can award. So, I mean, what caught my eye before was the Department of Transportation had awarded a wastewater treatment contract or grant, loan, it was a loan, to this community, and I think it was Estancia. And so I was just curious, why was the Department of Transportation awarding a contract for a wastewater treatment plant? Well, it really is through this infrastructure bank, and it can award loans to municipalities at very low interest rates, 1% sometimes, depending on the capacity of the municipality to repay that loan, for transportation projects or water and wastewater projects. Had never heard of it before. The state treasurer is here. He probably knows all about it, and I'm gonna pick his brain during our break to find out if Tim knows a lot about that. But how it works is it's a publicly regulated loan fund, and it's public funds that are put out. The interest, when the loan is repaid, the interest is added to the corpus of the loan fund, and they just keep recycling it. We have something similar in the Mortgage Finance Authority with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. There are lots of examples in state government already of the state taking a more enlightened approach to how to finance infrastructure in the state of New Mexico than to simply put out bonds, which are basically debt that the state incurs and that we pay interest to somebody else for. When we're sitting on lots and lots of public funds that could be utilized in a much more cost-effective and profitable basis, it would save taxpayers money. So having gone to the symposium in Santa Fe last year, I came away with my head spinning. I bought the book, Web of Debt, there, and I see her new book is available out here. I guess there's a symposium next year. I'll buy next year's book as well, because Ellen Brown really nails it when she describes not just how our system works, which was incredibly illuminating to me, but how little we know about how our system works, and how, this Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve, how, money is created, how we've gone in the last 10 years, we've over 400 times as much money in the economy, but it's all in terms of debt because of loans that have been advanced by banks, and how little bankers understood what went on in the crash when our house of cards fell apart. I'm a social worker, as has been mentioned, and social workers know very little about finance. Most of us. I'm sure there are some very wealthy social workers somewhere that invest. I haven't found them yet, but what I've done since that symposium last year is read like crazy. Michael Lewis's books, The Big Short, which was, if you haven't read that, very scary reading. It'll keep you awake late at night. About how little the supposed experts in finance understood the risks that were being taken. The assumptions that were made were enormous. Oh, these are AAA bonds. These are, these securities have a AAA rating. Well, they were made out of garbage. And yet, the German government was buying those things. That was where they were mostly selling them, was to the Germans, the ostensibly, brilliant, decisive, all-knowing Germans were buying garbage because it had a AAA rating, and they went down just as badly as the American taxpayers went down. Those books have convinced me that we need a public bank in New Mexico. And how it would be structured, I don't know. I noticed that the topic I'm supposed to address is what are the prospects for public banking in New Mexico? I think you're starting at the right point right here with these symposia. This is where we need to begin. The voters need to be educated about the possibilities, because what's clear is that if we stick to advice from the bankers, we will never get from point A to point B. If the state treasurer only listens to bankers, we will never get from point A to point B. We will never make the change that we need to. And this state desperately needs a change. We need a game changer. It's tiresome to go over all the economic realities of New Mexico and how we languish at the bottom of the pile in every measure financial. So we need something. I thought industrial hemp was going to be it. Okay. It still might. I see Alan Weber is here, and he's got some great other ideas that we're eagerly looking forward to. We've had a jobs council, a legislative committee that goes around the state culling from among all the thinkers out there great ideas for how New Mexico can turn itself around. And they always come back 3 years in a row now with the same three ideas: cut taxes, cut regulations, and invest public money in give public money to private entrepreneurs so that they can flourish. And it hasn't worked for 3 years. It won't work for the next 3 years. It won't work for the next 300 years, probably. We need some new kind of thinking. And of all the ideas that I've seen kicked around in this state over the last several legislative sessions, when Representative Brian Egolf introduced a public banking bill modeled on the North Dakota model, that made the most sense. And so when constituents started calling up and saying, why don't we have a public bank in New Mexico, I started doing as much research on it as I could possibly. We need something to turn things around, and this has great possibilities. the Bank of North Dakota has fostered an environment of entrepreneurship. This is about the farthest thing you could have from state control, which is what everybody always brings up. That's what the first thing the bankers bring up. Oh yeah, we want to turn this over to the politicians. Are you crazy? Well, the bankers haven't done such a great job with it. But nevertheless, we're not talking about turning it over to the politicians. We're not talking about giving cushy deals to investment advisors so that our public funds can grow 0.5% more than they grew when we didn't invest all that money with those expensive advisors. What we're talking about really is trying to rethink how we finance infrastructure in the state and how we finance private enterprise. That bank in North Dakota, we're going to have a whole report on North Dakota, so I won't try to share with you what I've read about it, but it sounds like one of the things it's done is fostered an incredible upsurge in the capacity of community banks to invest in local businesses. They have a very dynamic system in which the community bank does all the background work. They say, okay, we'll lend this new butcher who has a new technique for taking cattle carcasses and making it into hamburger, and we're going to give him a loan at 4%. And then they sell half of that loan to the public bank. The Bank of North Dakota buys in. They drop the overall interest rate down to the point where it practically guarantees success. The community bank makes a lot of money. The public bank returns money on that investment to the general fund of the state and helps keep taxes down for everybody else. And yeah, North Dakota has had great upsurge in oil and gas revenues recently, but this bank was started back before 1920, and all through the Depression. They did not have the kind of economic collapse that characterized the rest of the country. This is really a very simple idea that we need to all learn as much about as we possibly can. So buy the books, ask the questions, push our bankers. They are not the smartest guys in the room. And if there are bankers here, I apologize, but they turn out to be just like you and me. They just happen to major in finance in college instead of social work, but they're not a whole lot more brilliant, and they don't have special secret knowledge, although they would like us to believe they do. The reality is that there are better ways of going about financing our infrastructure than we've adopted. There are many, many models, and I think it's great that Santa Fe is moving ahead. We need something that we can point to. That's great. We need Albuquerque to pick up the slack, and hopefully a new city administration, if not this one, will decide to move in that direction as well. And I think the state needs to constantly have, every year, a bill for public banking brought up and introduced, because it's an educational process. It took Mary Jane Garcia 16 years to end cockfighting in New Mexico. 16 years. She introduced the same bill every year for 16 years. It wasn't ruled germane in many of those years, but she always had hearings and educated. That's the way it works. And if I can learn enough about it to have to vote on it, then lots of other legislators also need to be learning about it. And the way we'll learn about it is when our constituents push us. If we have to answer your questions, we've got to go out and read some books, we've got to go to some seminars, we've got to attend some of these symposia. So let's keep the pressure up, let's keep asking, and let's make sure that New Mexico tries a game changer, because God knows we need something that will really turn the state's economy around. I don't know if you have any questions, but I'd be glad to answer any right now. Oh.
Fred in the back.
Okay, we'll take it two at a time because my memory doesn't go forever.
My name is Carol Moravka, and I live in Bernalillo County, and this is my first experience whatsoever with this banking So I am a very, very low-level educated person. But I'd like to know what happened to the banking bill in the legislature and what will you project would happen in the 30-day session coming up.
Well, I'm not sure it'll be ruled germane in the 30-day session. That's the first problem, the first hurdle we have to get over. But at least if it's introduced, the name is out there and we keep pushing for it. But what's happened in the past, of course, is like most of these issues that are fairly new concepts that get surfaced, is that most legislators, or at least the ones on the first committee, turn to the lobbyists for, well, what do you think, John Anderson? You represent the banking industry in the state. And John Anderson says, well, our members are public funds are far too important to tamper with. We shouldn't tamper with the system. We have to keep it exactly like it's been for the last 100 years because it's producing so much for us. I'm not sure why, but that's always the advice, that we don't want to make radical changes. Maybe study it slowly, maybe refer it to an interim committee, maybe pass a memorial to look at the matter, but don't take any action. That'll always be the advice we get. And so the first 5 or 6 times the bill comes up, hopefully we start building a little bit of support. And if you all are keeping the pressure on, each time we may move it a little bit further. That industrial hemp bill, incidentally, last year flew through the legislature. It had no opposition. Well, I shouldn't say no, but I mean it didn't. But it passed by overwhelming bipartisan majorities in both houses. And then it got to the governor's desk, and she just had a brain lapse for a moment there and said, "Oh, the feds have said it's illegal." The feds had already said any state that wants to can try it, but she didn't want to try it, I guess. But so there's not much prospect for it this next year, absolutely none. But that's how we start, and maybe in 3 years we'll have it. But it's the bankers and their lobbyists that lead the opposition, and we need to educate them as well on that. She had a follow-up question.
If the lobbyists from the banks are going to say, let's study it ad infinitum, then who are the lobbyists on the other side?
Well, it's got to be you.
Is it the Institute?
It's going to have to be you all, yeah. I mean, I think you're making a really good point, and that is those guys are up there. Well, first of all, they're hired, right? They're not there because they really have this belief in public banking. They're hired to represent the interests of private banking. They're hired to represent those interests, commercial bankers. And so, they're there 24/7. If we meet at 3 in the morning, they're there. The citizenry is at a serious disadvantage over that. But still, when we do have a committee hearing, there can be some people there expressing well-informed, well-thought out, and with some solid examples from North Dakota, from other places, of how this is working elsewhere. That can counteract some of that. That's the process of educating that we're talking about.
Jerry, do we have a catchy name for the new bill that will be introduced in the next regular legislative session?
Boy, a catchy name.
Name the bill.
Catchy name is really good.
To name
yeah.
the bill, like the People's Bank Bill or something of that nature.
That's a great idea. Here's another point, though. It'll probably have to be Representative Egolf that gets the first shot at introducing it again. There's a certain, I don't know if it's courtesy or protocol. If somebody has ventured out into deep water by introducing a concept, you don't want to later come in and kind of steal it just because you have a catchy name. We can try to sell our catchy name to Representative Egolf. Now, if he says, "Oh, I'm up to my ears. I'm now the minority leader. I don't have time to do that," then we can take the catchy name and get somebody else to introduce it. But I think you're right. A catchy name would help.
Tom Greason, since we went to the meeting a year ago up in Santa Fe, when this same issue was presented, I've been thinking, if we ever had a discussion down here a year later, this place would be packed. And the reason I guess I thought that a meeting, a conference like this would be bursting at the seams was because it seems to me that the effort to establish public banking addresses at least two interesting questions that we're not finding good answers to right now. One of them is the impulse by some people to try to privatize our economy, trying to privatize public good, trying to sell off our roads, our water, our health system. They're trying to make profit out of everything. And it seems to me that the public, the effort, the movement, the impulse to private bank is to reverse that privatization. The other thing, even more important, is what happened to us 12 years ago, or 12 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever that collapse of the economy happened, when our neighbors' mortgages went south and the value of their houses became worthless because of derivatives. Those people don't need to be responsible for where our money is invested. Our public money needs to be public. It needs to go to public things. And I would just think that anywhere you came to visit, Gerald, would be overwhelmed because of people were here, because of at least those two concerns.
Okay.
I would like to say something. I would like to say that the people who showed up are the right people to begin this movement, and we don't need to be worried about having a packed room. Thank you.
Make one comment on the last gentleman. He has a button here that I can't resist this. Fight truth decay.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, we could also say the same thing about electoral turnout. I mean, why do we get 11% of the voters, in a municipal election, or 20% in a statewide? Yeah, but instead of wasting a lot of energy figuring out why they're not here, let's make sure every time we redo this, we bring 2 or 3 of our friends with us and gradually fill the place up and get some excitement going around this concept.
I'm glad to see that we have a lot of social workers here. I'm a nurse, so I know nothing about this, so I'm glad to hear about this, but I don't understand why they started everything in Santa Fe, where I would think there would be more red tape up there than as opposed to Albuquerque. It's a bigger place here, more people, so maybe we need to get the word out more in Albuquerque here and get something started here.
Good.
And
good,
I have
thank you.
lots of questions, but I wrote them on here.
Okay, where's the next hand coming from? Way in the front, okay. Okay, where in the front?
It's Roxanne.
Thank you.
Hello, Roxanne Allen. Jerry, I wanted to talk with you a little bit more about the lobbying situation. There's a big difference, it seems to me, between the community banks and the global banks, as you refer to them. Are the community banks, do they have lobbyists? Are they politically kind of in lockstep with the global banks, or would that be kind of a pressure point that we could use to break that stalemate?
I absolutely think you're making a really good point. In New Mexico, it's all the banking association, but within that group, you've got, now the thing is, when they have they have a meeting every year, a luncheon, they invite legislators to, and I noticed that, you know, there'll be 4 people from Bank of America and 3 from Wells Fargo, and the big banks will have, you know, half of a table devoted just to their bank. And then the community banks will send 1 or 2 people, but their interests are so different. And I would think that that's something we really ought to be able to exploit, maybe too strong a word, but take advantage of, just to try to point out that, look, on this issue at least, your interests and those of the big national banks, big global banks, don't really coincide. And here's a way we can help you. We've lost some of our most outstanding community banks over the last few years, and I just think it's unfortunate. Apparently, the Dodd-Frank Act has guaranteed that those big banks will be too big to fail, that we'll never let them fail, and so they can continue to do the same irresponsible investing that they've been doing. But the community banks that were really responsive to local needs are the ones that have been hamstrung by the Dodd-Frank restrictions, and so they're not able to function. And that's, I think, something that we really ought to be able to it's a chink in the armor of the banking lobby that we ought to be able to really identify and take advantage of.
And I kind of took that from the information that I've heard, that the community banks in North Dakota are very much in favor of the state bank and have thrived under under this plan.
And there are a lot of them. I mean, they have, I think you said, Nicole, the highest per capita of, you know, community banks of any state. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Teresa Gonzalez. I'm here on behalf of the Atrisco Land Grant. I had a question actually for everyone at first, but definitely want to talk a little bit more with Nicole about your experience with Santa Fe and building out the infrastructure and just the planning process, right? It takes time and a lot of investment, a lot of stakeholders. The right ones need to be at the table. Has there been any general expressed interest for the Albuquerque area or within the county or any other municipal political subdivision? Or local community members interested in the public banking system is my first question. And my second question is regarding the feasibility studies, the 2 that were conducted, who funded those, and what was the process in getting that done? Because the analysis is critically important.
I don't need a microphone. I grew up on a farm calling cows. The feasibility study was ordered by the City of Santa Fe and paid for by the City of Santa Fe. A team of consultants, including bankers and financial people and elected representatives, selected the consultant from, I think, 5 applicants. I think they were wise to choose a local applicant who could really engage with the community and be involved. The consultant is Building Solutions, Katie Updike, and she's put in about 2 or 3 times more work than what she's gotten paid because she loves the community, so. And that was the city-funded feasibility? City-funded, it came through the Economic Development Department. It was $50,000 discretionary funds. But I would encourage you to think about doing your own feasibility study. I think there's a lot of different ways to look at what we might do, and it's important not to just accept one model.
I'm sorry? I think Diane, Councilor Gibson is going to talk about that during her presentation. There is some interest. I'm not sure how far along it is, but she'll share that during the panel.
Last year, when we were organizing our symposium, we met with legislators and nonprofits in Albuquerque, And we were so impressed with the high level of knowledge. They got it like that. And I think that they're ready to go. The people in Albuquerque were just waiting for our process to get a little further along to kind of show the way and make it an easier process. But I think the time is soon.
Want to address the people who talked about the size of this group and commercial banking. After you have gotten the so-called common people interested in doing their homework, and as was mentioned, it may take a couple of years, but if you ever get this room full of people who have done their homework, and then you go to Santa Fe, you'll find out how interested the commercial bankers are, because they will fight it all the way from the street into the committee rooms. You can't just show up. You have to know what you're talking about, because they aren't afraid of you unless they think you did your homework.
Good comment. Okay, okay, 1 and 2, okay.
My name's Louisa Barcalow, and I want to do a reality check just as a regular citizen. Where is the money that's in the somewhat secret permanent fund?
Where is that invested?
Yes.
Well, yeah, we have at least two permanent funds. Oh, Tim just got away. I was going to turn to him for, yeah, darn it, our state treasurer just slipped out the back door there. But
I knew it was a secret.
yeah, but we've got about $15 billion in the land grant permanent fund, and I think about $4.5 or $5 billion in the severance tax permanent fund. So I think the way that's done is it's invested in the stock market largely. There are a few other exceptions. They can invest a tiny portion of it in local entrepreneurial efforts, almost like venture capital efforts. But for the most part, it's simply invested in a diverse portfolio of stocks and real estate and bonds. They can now invest internationally, so we may own apartments in Taiwan for all I know. And then the revenue that comes in from that, a portion of it is used for the budget. It becomes a revenue stream for the budget, but most of it then just goes right back in as part of the expanding permanent fund.
Could that, in my imagination, the permanent fund in a public bank would be a wonderful combination.
And certainly it could become the source of the startup investment pool, the first, I don't know, billion. I don't know, they wouldn't want to put $1 billion, but that's $2 billion. Okay, the first 100 million we'll put in there. But we issue every year, the state issues probably, some years it's 400 million, other years it's 800 million in bonds for capital improvement projects. We pay a bank to handle that for us, and we pay a bank interest if they buy those bonds. Why not make it our bank and pay ourselves the interest?
Right. I'm also on the committee that put this together, and I've been asked to remind people that it's now time for a break.
Oh.
And we will convene later, and thank you all so much for coming.